Good morning. Today I'm in Trebetherick in Cornwall, which is a village on the estuary of the River Camel. It's in a lovely spot, lovely scenic spot, but there's a couple of other notable things about it. Firstly, it's got a long connection with the poet John Betjeman, which we'll explore, and it's also got a lovely church called St Enodoc, which we'll also have a look at. So let's have a wander. So we're starting the tour on Damer Bay. I've got the village of Trebetherick behind me. It's a lovely day. It is a bit windy. So we're on the Camel estuary here. You can just see over in the distance there between the cliffs Padstow. And if I swing round here, you can see the Camel. That's the part of the Camel that goes out to the Atlantic Ocean. The name of the river comes from two ancient Cornish words, cam and hale, which means the crooked estuary. The other notable thing about the Camel is, and you can see now the tide's out, you can see it, is that it's got a very treacherous sandbank, which is known as the Doom Bar, because so many, well, the name originally was Dunbar, which meant dune bar, but it's become known as Doom Bar because so many ships have wrecked and capsized on it. Since records began in the 19th century, we're talking about hundreds of shipwrecks and consequently hundreds of mariners that died. So it's very, very treacherous. And we'll come back to the topic of sand when I reach the church, because there's a sand story associated with the Church of St Enodoc as well. So let's talk about, I'm just going to sit down over here. Let's talk about John Betjeman. He started coming here with his family in the summers, every summer, in the 1910s, before the First World War. Initially they were staying in sort of boarding houses, but later on his father had a house built down here, which we'll have a look at a bit later. And in 1960, Betjeman bought a house here as well, which we'll also have a look at. And he lived here from 1960 until 1984 when he died, so it was very special to him. In those days, this part of Cornwall was off the beaten track. It was a long way, well, not a long way, but it was far enough away from the sort of tourist traps like St Ives and Falmouth. In other parts of Cornwall, that it was, I wouldn't say it was isolated, but it was certainly not a tourist destination. So it's very special to Betjeman. Another interesting thing about his attitude towards Cornwall, which he loved, was that he really did regard it as a separate country from England. As soon as he got the train from Waterloo and crossed the bridge over the Tamar, to him it was like passing an invisible checkpoint and entering a different country, which is really interesting because it kind of harks back to the days when Cornwall wasn't part of England and was a separate British kingdom. Anyway, I'm gonna try and get out of the wind a little bit, because I want to read you, there's a couple of poems that Betjeman wrote about Trebetherick, which I'm going to read you. And the first one is one called Trebetherick, surprisingly enough, and it's kind of a nostalgic poem about his childhood memories. So I'm just going to try and find somewhere out of the wind. I might go down onto the beach actually, and then I'll read it. like a spot, although it doesn't look very comfortable, but what the hell. So this is the poem called Trebetherick. We used to picnic where the thrift grew deep and tufted to the edge. We saw the yellow foam flakes drift in trembling sponges on the ledge, below us till the wind would lift them up the cliff and o'er the hedge. Sand in the sandwiches, wasps in the tea, sun on our bathing dresses heavy with the wet, squelch of the bladder-wrack waiting for the sea, fleas round the tamarisk, an early cigarette. From where the coastguard houses stood, one used to see below the hill the lichened branches of a wood, in summer silver cool and still, and there the shade of evil could stretch out at us from Shiloh Mill. Thick with sloe and blackberry, uneven in the light, lonely ran the hedge, the heavy meadow was remote. The oldest part of Cornwall was the wood as black as night, and the pheasant and the rabbit lay torn open at the throat. But when a storm was at its height, and feathery slate was black in rain, and tamarisks were hung with light, and golden sand was brown again, springtide and blizzard would unite, and sea come flooding up the lane. Waves full of treasure then were roaring up the beach, ropes around our mackintoshes, waders warm and dry. We waited for the wreckage to come swirling into reach. Ralph, Vasey, Alistair, Biddy, John and I. Then roller into roller curled and thundered down the rocky bay, and we were in a water world of rain and blizzard, sea and spray, and one against the other hurled, we struggled round to Greenaway. Blessed be St Enodoc, blessed be the wave, blessed be the springy turf, we pray, pray to thee. Ask for our children all the happy days you gave to Ralph, Vasey, Alistair, Biddy, John and me. So there's a lovely streak of nostalgia and longing for a lost childhood in that poem. And sitting here looking at the beach with all these kids around, I'm sure they will all be nostalgic for Damer Bay and Trebetherick when they grow up. So now I'm walking away from the bay. I'm walking up a road called Damer Lane, which leads up into the village high street from the beach. And I'm going to show you a couple of houses. Let's just have a look at this wall. I love the way that tree grows out of that wall like that. Anyway, let's carry on walking. So we're just coming up to the house on the right here called Treen, which is the house that Betjeman bought in 1960. Just gonna let this car go past. And as I said, he lived here until his death in 1984. I've got the sun right in my eyes, so I'm going to try and scan up here. There we go. Lovely house. I'm not going to dwell here too long because it is a private residence and it's not fair on the people that live here if you've got people like me walking around filming. But there we go. And that overlooks the bay and the golf course and the lovely Church of St Enodoc. I'm going to walk a bit further up here because just around this corner here is the house that Betjeman's father built in had built in 1928 by an architect who was a golfing friend of his. So this is called Undertown, and it is very grand. And I guess that gives you an idea of how wealthy the Betjemans were at the time. I don't quite know why it didn't stay in the family, but certainly John Betjeman never lived here after when he was an adult anyway, as far as I can tell. So yeah, that's Undertown. really nice. Okay, so now we're going to walk back down the lane, and we're going to walk across the golf course to the Church of St Enodoc. So I'm walking back down Damer Lane, and I'm just going to turn left here and take the footpath to the church. There are some more nice houses down this stretch. When the Betjeman started coming to Trebetherick, it was a much smaller, Trebetherick. It was a much smaller village than it is today. And as well as the Cornish locals, there were quite a lot of ex-British colonial people who'd come back from places like India and China to retire here. Sort of tea merchants and coffee merchants and jute merchants and people like that. And according to Bevis Hillier's biography of Betjeman, they tended to look down on the Betjemans because Betjeman's father made his money in the furniture trade. So even though it was a remote part of Cornwall, the class system was up and running here, of course. And now we're going to come out onto the golf course. So I have to be careful that I don't get hit by a golf ball. The church is right in the middle of the golf course. I don't actually know how long the golf course has been here, but obviously it postdates the church, but I'm not sure whether this was, I suspect it was a golf course even when Betjeman was coming here, because his dad was a keen golfer. So there, just in the distance, you can see the church. So let's walk through here. So I'm going to walk up here, up the back way, I think, because it will give you a good view of the church on this side. As you can see, it's kind of nestled into the hill here. In terms of St Enodoc, he's one of those saints that we... Oh, here, the wind's picking up again. St Enodoc, yes, he's one of those obscure ancient British saints of whom we know nothing at all, other than that he is a Cornish saint, but as with so many of these early saints, his life is incredibly obscure. So I'm at the back of the church now, and you can see that wonderfully wonky steeple there. And in the background, that hill that you can see is called Bray Hill, and there are I think 4 or 5 Bronze Age barrow graves up there. So we'll go, once we've had a look around the church, we'll walk up to the top of the hill and have a look at the barrows. But I just wanted to show you the church from this sort of side, and I'm just going to pan around here, and there's the estuary where we've just walked from. So let's go into the churchyard. Now, according to the Building of England's volume on on Cornwall. The church is essentially Norman, although having said that, a lot of what you can actually see is sort of later medieval, so 13th, 14th, 15th century. So when we say a church is essentially Norman, at what point does all the additional work and add-ons over the centuries make it not essentially normal? Maybe never. It's a bit like the old puzzle of the ship of Achilles. Is it still the ship of Achilles when every plank of wood has been replaced? Anyway, let's go in to the church. Actually, before we go in, I'm going to have a walk around the churchyard. So we're going to start over here and do a circuit. There's a couple of graves in particular I want to show you. One is obviously Betjeman's, but there's another one. But it's interesting looking at some of these, particularly for some reason the crosses. They've got this, I don't know what that is. Is that lichen or moss growing on them? It's kind of very dry and crumbly, but yeah, look at this one. This one is covered in it. This is Brigadier Alfred Ray, late of the Rajput Regiment. Yeah, we were talking about, died (1949). So he was probably one of the old India hands that was living here when the Betjeman started coming here. Yeah, look at that. Lichen or moss or whatever it is. It's lovely. So I'll look at the church, view of the church from this side. As you can see, it's very simple. Betjeman's mother is buried in one of these graves, but I'm not entirely sure which one it is. Some of them are quite hard to read. Let's walk up here. Right, let's start again. The wind is blowing so strongly here that it blew off my microphone. So I've lost one of the magnetic clips, which is a minor mishap. But anyway, let's carry on up here. There's another Mabley there. There's quite a few of them in this churchyard. So one of the graves that I wanted to show you is just here. So this is Fleur Lombard, who died in a fire. Was from Bristol, I think, or maybe she was from around here, I don't know. Anyway, she died in a supermarket fire in 1996, which was deliberately started by a security guard who was on his first night there and obviously wanted to cause some sort of drama. And she was the first female firefighter to die in civil action in Britain, and posthumously she was awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal. So thanks for your service, Fleur. Now let's walk down and see. Actually no, before we walk down and have a look at Betjeman's grave, I just want to say a little bit more about the church. So from this side you can see how deeply set into the hillside it is, and by the mid-19th century, I'm going to sit down here and see if I can get out of the wind a little bit. So from here you can see how deeply set into the hillside the church is. By the mid-19th century, so much sand had built up around the church that it was covered up to the roof. In other words, up to there. So in order to carry out services, the priest and the congregation had to enter through a hole in the roof. And I think by that time, the priest was only doing a service once a year, just to sort of collect the tithes and keep the church in operation, so to speak. But it was completely buried in sand. Well, not completely, up to the roof in sand. And then in 1863, the priest at the time, who was here at the time, started digging it out again. And a couple of years later, it was restored, and the sand, thankfully, hasn't come back since then. Now, there's a local legend explaining where all that sand, the sand that made the Doom Bar and the sand that buried the Church of St Enodoc, came from. So the tale goes that one day there was a fisherman who saw a mermaid basking on some rocks in the Camel estuary. And he must have been a nasty piece of work, because he picked up his longbow and fired an arrow into her. The mermaid was mortally wounded, but before she died, she cursed the fisherman and cursed the estuary and the surrounding land. And henceforward, she said, it would all be choked by sand. And so it was. Right, let's have a look at Betjeman's gravestone. Hello, doggy. There it is, Gothic inscription. He was buried here in 1984. I've seen a film of the his coffin being carried across the golf course to the churchyard, and it was an absolutely foul, wet, windy day, and the guys carrying it got absolutely soaked. While we're still out here, I want to read you the first section of a poem by Betjeman called Sunday Afternoon Service in St Enodoc Church, Cornwall. I'm not going to read the whole thing out here. I'm going to read the second part inside the church. But it is so windy at the moment that I'm going to have to try and find somewhere. I'd love to read it from here because it's such a lovely view, but it's so windy that I think it will spoil. I'm not even sure you'll be able to hear me. So I'm going to try and find somewhere a bit more sheltered before I start. So I'm right by this side of the church. It's still quite windy here, but I hope it's not as bad as it was further up the hill. Anyway, this is the Betjeman poem, Sunday Afternoon Service in St Enodoc Church, Cornwall. Come on, this hillock hides the spire, now that one and now none. As winds about the burnished path through lady's finger, time and bright varieties of saxifrage, so grows the tinny tenor faint or loud, and all things draw towards St Enodoc. Come on, and it is 5 to 3. Paths unfamiliar to golfers' brogues. Cross the 11th fairway broadside on, and leave the 14th tee for 13th green, ignoring royal and ancient bound for God. Come on, no longer barefoot, the soul grows hot in London shoes again. Jack Lambourne in his Sunday navy blue wears tie and collar, all from Selfridges. There's Enid with a silly parasol, and Graham in grey flannel with a crease across the middle of his coat, which lay pressed neath the box of his Meccano set. Sunday to Sunday, still come on, the tinny tenor. Hoverflies remain more than a moment on a ragwort bunch, and people's passing shadows don't disturb red admirals basking with their wings apart. A mile of sunny, empty sand away, a mile of shallow pools and lugworm casts. Safe, faint and surfy laps the lowest tide. Even the villas have a Sunday look. The ransom mowers locked into the shed. I have a splitting headache from the sun, and bedroom windows flutter cheerful chintz, where, double aspirined, a mother sleeps, while father in the loggia reads a book, large, desultory, birthday present size, published with coloured plates by Country Life, a Bernard Darwin on the English links, or Braden Taylor on the mashy shot. Come on, he thinks of Monday's round. Come on, that interlocking grip. Come on, he drops into a doze. Come on, more and far away. More far and far away. The children climb a final stile to church. Electoral roll still flapping in the porch. Then the cool silence of St Enodoc. Before we go inside the church, I just want to take another look at the steeple and the tower, because there is a single bell just below that steeple in the tower, and it came from the wreck of an Italian ship called the Immaculata, which was wrecked on the Doom Bar in 1875, and the bell was salvaged from the wreck and bought by the church. So that's where the church bell came from. So I'm sitting inside the porch of the church, and there's a couple of things here to show you. The first is this Cornish Celtic cross, which was found in the old boundary wall of the church when it was restored in 1865 after it was dug out of the sand. I mean, who knows how old that is? Ancient. And next to it is this massive tombstone, which is the tombstone of John and Alice Mabley, and we saw some Mableys out in the churchyard, so obviously a family with a long connection to the church. But this is a father and daughter who died within a week of one another in 1687, and the words of dedication, which I'm not going to try and read, were written by the wife and mother of the two. So I'm going to read the second part of Sunday afternoon service in St Enodoc Church, Cornwall. My eyes, recovering in the sudden shade, discern the long known little things within, a map of France in damp above my pew, grey-blue of granite in the small arcade, late Perp and not a Parker specimen, but roughly hewn on windy Bodmin Moor. The modest windows palely glazed with green, the smooth slate floor, the rounded wooden roof, the Norman arch, the cable moulded font, all have a humble and West Country look. O drastic restoration of the guide, O three-light window by a Plymouth firm, absurd truncated screen, O sticky pews, embroidered altar cloth, untended lamps, so soaked in worship you are loved too well, for that dispassionate and critic stare that I would use beyond the parish bounds, biking in high-banked lanes from tower to tower, on sunny antiquarian afternoons. Come on, a final pull. Tom Blake stalks over from the bell rope to his pew, just as he slopes about the windy cliffs. Looking for wreckage in a lightly tide, nor gives the holy table glance nor nod. A rattler's red baize is drawn aside. Miss Rhoda Paulden pulls the tremolo, the oboe, flute and vox humana stops. A village voluntary fills the air and ceases suddenly as it began, save for one oboe faintly humming on, as slow the weary clergyman subsides, tired with his bike ride from the parish church. He runs his hands twice across his face. Dearly beloved, and a bumblebee zooms itself free into the churchyard sun. And so my thoughts this happy Sabbath tide Where deep cliffs loom enormous, where cascade Massam bryanthemum and stone crop down, where the gull looks no longer than a lark, hung midway twixt the cliff top and the sand. Sun-shadowed valleys roll along the sea, forced by the backwash. See the nearest wave rise to a wall of huge translucent green and crumble into spray along the top, blown seaward by the land breeze. Now she breaks and in an arch of thunder plunges down, to burst and tumble, foam on top of foam, crisscrossing, baffled, sucked and shot again, a waterfall of whiteness, down a rock, without a source but rollers furthest reach, and tuft of sea pink high and dry for years, are flooded out of ledges, boulders seem no bigger than a pebble washed about in this tremendous tide. O kindly slate, to give me shelter in this crevice dry. These shivering stalks of bent grass, lucky plant, have better chance than I to last the storm. O kindly slate of these unaltered cliffs, firm, barren substrate of our windy fields. O lichened slate in walls, they knew your worth, who raised you up to make this house of God. What faith was his, that dim, that Cornish saint, small rushlight of a long forgotten church, who lived with God on this unfriendly shore, who knew he made the Atlantic and the stones and destined seamen here to end their lives, dashed on a rock, rolled over in the surf, and not one hair forgotten. Now they lie in centuries of sand beside the church. Less pitiable are they than the corpse of a large golfer, only 4 weeks dead. This sunlight and sea distant afternoon, praise ye the Lord, and in another, the Lord's name by harmonium be praised, the second evening and the 14th Psalm. So let's have a look inside the church. Very simple, whitewashed walls, but there are some interesting things. Now this font here is Norman, and it's made of local sandstone. So that's very simple, very solid. And this chest behind it is interesting because this is recorded in an inventory of church goods in the 17th century. So it may well be older than that, but it's a lovely, another lovely solid piece of work. Most of the glass that you can see is Victorian. In fact, I think all of it is. As is as are the pews, the benches. On the left here is a remnant of the Norman church. This is now the vestry, but this was the north transept of the Norman church. So there's an original bit of Norman work there. Coming over here, there's a memorial on the wall to a ship that sunk, well, to the 3 crew members that died when a ship sank about 2 miles up the coast of here, from here, in 1995, the Maria Assumpta. It's a rather lovely memorial. And the captain was charged with manslaughter due to negligence, so I can only assume he wasn't checking where he was going or hadn't navigated properly or something, but anyway, that's a sad story. And then walking down here, there's one other memorial that I want to show you, which is this was arranged by John Betjeman, and it's a memorial to his father Ernest. Right, now it's time to make for Bray Hill. So now we're going to head up to Bray Hill for our final stop, and we're going to have a look at those Bronze Age barrows. So I've made it round to the foot of Bray Hill. I think I'm actually on the southwest coastal path now. I had to go across the golf course and I had one or two close encounters with golfers, but pleased to report no damage done, and they were quite friendly. I'm not a golfer, I've never played golf, but when I see a course like that, which was extraordinarily beautiful, I can kind of see the attraction of golfing. But anyway, let's forget that and let's walk up Bray Hill and see if we can find these barrows. It's absolutely gorgeous here. If it wasn't for the wind, it would be a perfect day. And the wind's actually okay, it's just not great if you're recording a video and you're trying to talk, but that's okay. This is lovely. So I've just gone onto a path which I'm hoping is going to take me up the hill. Let's see where we come out. Yeah, this looks promising. Just got caught on a branch there. Okay, so let's go right to the top now. So I'm on the top of Bray Hill. It is very windy, but it's a fantastic view. Let's start over here. So straight ahead, that's the Atlantic Ocean. Just over there is Trebetherick. And if I pan round this way, over there is Padstow. And that sand is part of the infamous Doom Bar. Really is glorious. If it wasn't for the wind, it would be absolutely beautiful, but it is still beautiful. The wind is okay. The wind is doing what wind does. Now over here, I think these are the barrows, so let's have a look. There, or is that two? I'm not sure. Got another one here. We've got one. Is that a separate one, or is that part of the one we've just passed? I think it looks kind of separate, but I'm not too sure. It's a baby one anyway. And then we've got another one over here. So I haven't... Let's walk around this one. I haven't been able to find out much about these. I think mainly because nothing much is known about them. According to I think it was on the Heritage England site, I looked these up and it said they were Bronze Age, but other than that, other than that, I don't know anything about them, and I'm not sure anybody does. As far as I can tell, they've never been excavated, which is, I suppose, is that surprising? I don't know. So many of these sites have been excavated now, but maybe it's not surprising, I don't know. So we don't know anything about who was buried here. I mean, it's such a wonderful site, vantage point, that, I don't know, does that mean they were important people, or is it just that's where ancient people were buried in kind of isolated places like this? I don't know. And indeed, maybe it wasn't even isolated. Maybe this was the thriving community in the Bronze Age. Who knows? I guess the thing is, at the top of the hill, it's defensible, which I guess was important in those days. So maybe this was some sort of settlement. Who knows? Right by the river, plenty of fishing, I guess. Anyway, that wind is so strong now, I'm going to turn off the camera and it's time for some refreshment. I've just walked up Damer Lane and I'm coming out onto the village high street, and as far as I can tell, there are no pubs in Trebetherick, which seems kind of strange, but I've certainly not seen any or found any. So I'm going to go into this place on the corner here, which is called the Mohay. And have some refreshment in there. So I'm sitting in the garden of the Mohay, very pleasant, and I've got a pint of Chub Pale Ale, which is from a local brewery, Blunt Rock Brewery. I've never had any of their beer before, so I'll give that a try. So I hope you enjoyed that tour around Trebetherick. It was a bit windy. So I hope I haven't played the videos back yet, but I hope they came out without too much disturbance to the audio, but time will tell. But anyway, thanks for watching and I will see you next time.